He had always loved music. Even as a child, he would spend hours with his small keyboard, pressing keys one by one, trying to make sense of the sounds, feeling the notes move through him. Music was his way of speaking when words felt too small. Every evening, he would sit in the corner of his tiny room, headphones on, completely lost in the world he created with each note. His family noticed his gift, but they were not musicians themselves, so they never fully understood the depth of his talent. They just knew he could make the old, slightly out-of-tune piano in their living room sing in ways that made them stop and listen. Life had been ordinary for him until the day an unexpected letter arrived. It was an invitation to perform at a local community music event. At first, he thought it was a mistake. He had never performed outside small family gatherings or school talent shows. The idea of standing on a stage, in front of strangers, filled him with both excitement and fear. The letter was simple. They wanted him to play a short, basic piece, nothing complicated, something that would fit in with the other performers. They expected a standard performance, nothing more. He read the words over and over, sitting on the edge of his bed, feeling a strange mix of disbelief and nervousness. A simple piece, they said. How could they know that every piece he played, even the simplest, held a piece of him? That every note was shaped by years of practice and personal touch? Yet, he reminded himself that this was just the beginning. A small step into a world he had only observed from afar. He began preparing the next day. At first, he tried to follow the instructions exactly. He played the simple piece over and over, making sure he got every note right. The repetition was comforting, but it did not capture the music he felt inside. His fingers moved mechanically at times, as if they were trapped in someone else's expectations. The simplicity of the piece was supposed to make it easy, but he found it constraining. Music had always been his voice, and now he felt like he was being asked to whisper when he wanted to shout. Days passed, and he continued to practice, but he could not stop thinking about how he could make the piece his own without breaking the rules. He experimented quietly in his room when no one was watching. He added soft embellishments, little flourishes, subtle changes in rhythm that made the notes flow differently. Sometimes, he would close his eyes and let the music guide him, forgetting about the audience, the event, and the expectations. He could feel the music moving through him in ways that made his heart beat faster, in ways that made him smile even when he was alone. At night, he would lie awake, imagining the stage. He could see himself sitting at the piano, the lights bright, the audience waiting. His mind played out every scenario. The applause that might follow, the faces of strangers moved by his music, and the feeling of connecting with them without words. Yet doubt crept in. What if they did not understand him? What if his improvisations made them uncomfortable? What if he failed and ruined his chance before it even began? He tried to remind himself that it was just a simple piece, as the invitation had said. But every time he sat at the piano, the piece felt like a blank canvas rather than a restriction. He wanted to paint it with colors only he could see, to tell a story that only he knew. He wondered if it was foolish to think he could transform something so ordinary into something extraordinary. And yet, the thought of trying filled him with a quiet thrill that he could not ignore. His family noticed a change in him. He was quieter at home, often lost in thought, his fingers tapping rhythms on the table even when he was not at the piano. They saw the glint in his eyes, a mix of excitement and tension. They did not ask many questions, knowing that music was his sanctuary. They only encouraged him to do his best, reminding him that this was a chance to share what he loved with others. The days leading up to the event were filled with preparation and reflection. He practiced at different times, experimenting with tempo, dynamics, and expression. He imagined the story he wanted to tell through the piece, thinking about the emotions he wanted to evoke. He envisioned the audience leaning forward, captivated by the music, feeling each note as he did. He imagined their surprise when the simple piece transformed into something moving, something unforgettable. The night before the performance, he sat at the piano in his room, fingers hovering over the keys. He played the piece slowly at first, then with more confidence, letting his own interpretation shine through. He felt the music in his chest, in his fingertips, in every breath he took. He realized that this was not just a performance. It was an opportunity to share a part of himself that words could never capture. He felt a sense of calm and purpose that replaced his nervousness. He also thought about the unpredictability of life and how this small event could open doors he had never imagined. Even if nothing extraordinary happened, he would still have the courage to perform, to take the risk of showing the world who he was. And that courage, he realized, was as important as the music itself. Finally, as he closed his eyes and played the last notes, he understood that the simple piece was no longer just a simple piece. It had become a reflection of his journey, his practice, his dreams, and his fears. It was a bridge between the quiet hours of practice and the bright stage awaiting him. He felt ready, not just to play the notes, but to let the music speak, to transform a simple request into a moment that could linger in the hearts of everyone who listened. The morning of the event arrived, and he felt a mixture of excitement and calm. He packed his music sheets carefully, checked his instrument, and walked to the venue with a steady pace. As he entered the hall, he saw the audience settling in, their faces filled with curiosity and anticipation. He caught glimpses of other performers, each preparing in their own way. He took a deep breath, reminded himself of the advice he had received, to play from the heart, to let the music tell its story, and to trust his instincts. Backstage, he sat quietly, observing the lights, the stage, and the crowd. The simple piece he was asked to perform seemed to him now like an open door rather than a limitation. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the memories of his solitary practice sessions flow through him. Every note, every pause, every subtle change in rhythm was a step closer to sharing himself with the world. He felt a steady confidence building inside, a quiet excitement that made him smile. When his turn came, he walked to the piano, feeling the weight of the moment but also the strength of his preparation. He sat down, took a deep breath, and let his fingers touch the keys. The simple piece began as instructed, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, he added the nuances he had practiced in private. The music started to breathe, to flow, to tell a story that was entirely his own. In that moment, he realized that he was no longer just performing. He was connecting, creating, and sharing something beautiful with everyone in the room. He had been asked to play a simple piece, but as he continued, it became clear that this was going to be more than just another performance. It was the beginning of a journey, a moment where fear and doubt gave way to creativity and expression, and where a simple request could become the first step towards something unforgettable. The day after he received the invitation, he began to prepare in earnest. The piece he was asked to play was simple, almost too simple, and yet he could not treat it as merely notes on a page. He wanted to understand it fully, to feel every pause, every rise and fall of the melody, as though it were speaking directly to him. He set up his piano in his small room and started to practice, slowly at first, listening carefully to every sound, letting it guide his fingers. As he played, he noticed the ordinary piece felt different to him each time. On some days it seemed cheerful and light, on others quiet and reflective. The same notes produced feelings he could not name. He realized that music was more than technical accuracy, it was emotion, and he wanted to make sure that emotion reached anyone who heard him play. The thought gave him both excitement and nervousness. What if the audience did not understand his interpretation? What if they only wanted a simple, straightforward performance and did not notice the little touches he was adding? He continued practicing, sometimes for hours at a stretch. Each time, he tried something new. A softer touch on certain keys, a pause that made the melody breathe, a slight change in tempo to bring out the feeling behind the notes. He began to experiment with subtle improvisations, small movements that were not written in the sheet music but that made the music feel alive. These private experiments gave him joy and a sense of freedom, but he kept them hidden. He worried that if he revealed them too early, they might seem out of place or too daring for the simple piece he had been asked to perform. Despite the excitement of experimenting, doubt remained. He questioned himself repeatedly. Was he doing too much? Would people think he was showing off? Was it better to play it safely just as they had asked? These thoughts often kept him awake at night, turning them over and over, weighing the risk of disappointment against the possibility of creating something extraordinary. He remembered times when he had played for friends and family, how their faces lit up when he added little flourishes. It gave him courage, but performing in front of strangers felt like stepping into an entirely different world. He tried to prepare himself mentally as well. Each morning, he would sit quietly, closing his eyes and imagining himself on stage. He pictured the audience sitting in rows, faces bright with expectation. He imagined the lights, the quiet hum of anticipation, and the moment when all eyes would turn toward him. He practiced seeing himself calm and confident, letting the music flow naturally, allowing himself to respond to the emotions within him rather than following only the notes on the page. It became a daily exercise as important as practicing the piano itself. One evening, he spoke to a close friend about his fears. The friend was not a musician but understood how much music meant to him. "You don't have to play it exactly as written," the friend said. "The notes are just the beginning. What matters is how you make it feel. Play it like you are telling a story, and people will listen." Those words stayed with him. They were simple but profound. He realized he had been focusing too much on perfection, on playing each note without error, rather than on expression. He decided to trust his instincts, to let the music guide him naturally. He wanted the audience to feel what he felt, not just hear the notes. With this new mindset, his practice sessions changed. He played with more freedom, allowing mistakes to become part of the music, letting the emotion flow without worrying if it was flawless. The days before the performance were filled with repetition and refinement. He made small adjustments, learning which parts of the piece could be emphasized and where a soft touch would make the melody more expressive. He experimented with different speeds, slowing down certain passages to let them resonate, speeding up others to convey excitement. He discovered nuances that made the piece feel richer, more personal, yet still accessible to anyone who listened. It was as if the simple piece was slowly transforming into something that belonged entirely to him. At the same time, he faced distractions and challenges. Life continued outside of his practice sessions. Family responsibilities, schoolwork, and daily chores competed for his attention. There were moments when he felt frustrated or tired, when the piano seemed too far away or the music too difficult to shape the way he wanted. But even in these moments, he returned to the piano, drawn by the quiet magic of creation. The joy that came when his fingers touched the keys and the world fell away. He also observed other musicians who had performed at past events. He watched videos, attended small concerts, and listened closely to how performers engaged with their audiences. He noticed that it was not just technical skill that captured attention, but the ability to connect, to communicate without words. He wanted to do that too, and it motivated him to keep refining not just the notes but the feeling behind them. He imagined the faces of the audience, hoping that one day they would be moved not only by his skill but by the honesty and emotion in his performance. Every evening, he reflected on his journey. He realized that preparing for a performance was about more than memorizing notes. It was about understanding himself, his feelings, and the way music could express them. He learned patience as he repeated passages over and over, discipline as he balanced practice with daily responsibilities, and courage as he dared to let the music carry him beyond the page. He began to see the simple piece as a gift, a way to challenge himself, to explore the boundaries of what he could create, and to connect with others through sound. On one particularly quiet evening, he sat at the piano and tried something new. He closed his eyes and let his hands move without thinking, allowing the music to come from inside rather than from the sheet. The notes danced and flowed, sometimes unexpectedly, yet perfectly in harmony. He felt a surge of joy and understanding. This was what he had been aiming for, not perfection, but truth in music. He realized that no matter how the audience reacted, he had already discovered something important about himself and his gift. As the day of the performance approached, he felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The small experiments and quiet practice sessions had given him confidence, but the thought of stepping onto the stage and playing in front of strangers still made his stomach twist with anticipation. He reminded himself that the goal was not to impress anyone, but to play honestly, to share his feelings through the music. That thought helped calm him, replacing some of the fear with purpose. Finally, the night before the event, he sat at the piano for a long final practice. He went through the simple piece repeatedly, now with the confidence of someone who had made it his own. He let each note breathe, added small nuances, and felt the music in every part of himself. By the time he finished, he felt a quiet satisfaction and readiness. The piece no longer seemed simple. It was now a reflection of months of thought, emotion, and care. He knew he could perform it with heart, and that gave him a sense of peace and anticipation for what was to come. He went to bed that night with the piano melody lingering in his mind. Sleep was light but filled with dreams of notes dancing and the audience listening. He felt ready to step into the next part of his journey, to transform a simple request into an opportunity to share something meaningful. For the first time, the simple piece felt like a bridge to something extraordinary, and he was determined to cross it fully, carrying with him all the emotion, practice, and quiet courage he had built in the days leading up to the performance. The morning of the performance arrived, and with it came a strange mix of excitement and nervous tension. He had prepared for weeks, practiced every nuance, and experimented with personal touches in the music. Yet the thought of facing a real audience made his heart race. As he walked toward the venue, he felt every step as if it carried the weight of the music he was about to share. The streets were quiet, the early sunlight casting long shadows, and he tried to focus on the calm within rather than the chaos his mind wanted to create. Arriving at the hall, he was struck by the size of it. The stage looked bigger than he had imagined, and rows of chairs filled with people stretched out before him. He could see parents, students, and local community members all waiting, unaware of what he might bring to life on that stage. He felt a flicker of doubt. Could he meet the expectations, even if no one knew his potential? But he took a deep breath, recalling all the hours he had spent in practice, and reminded himself that the music was not about perfection but about expression. Backstage, he observed other performers preparing. Some were stretching, some quietly humming their pieces, while others chatted nervously with friends. Each seemed confident, polished, and in control. He watched them with a mixture of admiration and apprehension, wondering if he would ever seem as composed as they did. He allowed himself a moment to recognize that they had all followed their own paths, but his journey was his own, unique in its quiet dedication and careful attention to emotion. He tried to let this thought soothe him. A stage manager called his name, and it was time. He walked onto the stage, feeling the lights warm against his skin. The audience was focused, the chatter fading, all eyes subtly turning toward him. He sat at the piano, and for a moment, the room seemed silent, as if waiting with him. He placed his fingers on the keys and paused, letting the first moments sink in. It was just him, the instrument, and the music. The simple piece he had practiced so many times now felt alive, ready to tell its story. He started with the written notes, careful and clear. The simplicity of the piece allowed him to find a rhythm with the audience, a shared space where their attention was directed solely toward the sound he was producing. Gradually, he added the subtle touches he had developed in private. A slight rise in volume here, a gentle pause there, shifts in tempo that made the melody flow like a story being told. He could feel the music resonate in the room, the way it had in his small practice sessions at home, and it gave him confidence. As the performance continued, he noticed the audience's reactions. Some leaned forward, intrigued. Others closed their eyes, absorbing the emotion of the notes. He realized that his improvisations, small though they were, had created a connection. The simple piece had become a living expression, carrying the feelings he had poured into it for weeks. His nervousness faded, replaced by a quiet focus. Every note he played was intentional, yet natural, guided by instinct and the emotion he felt within him. He allowed himself to lose track of time, concentrating only on the flow of the music. Each phrase became a conversation, each pause a breath shared with the listeners. The stage lights no longer seemed harsh. The audience was no longer intimidating. He was simply a vessel for the music, letting it move through him and into the space around him. He had worked so long to reach this point, and now the effort of weeks of practice was unfolding in real time, tangible and immediate. There were moments when his hands seemed to take on a life of their own, finding keys he had never consciously considered, adding textures that surprised him even as they felt right. The simple piece transformed subtly but completely, retaining its recognizable melody but carrying a depth and emotion that he had only imagined in his practice. He felt a thrill of understanding. This was why he had spent so many hours alone, refining every detail, trusting the music to lead him. The audience responded in ways he had not fully anticipated. There were soft gasps at unexpected turns, smiles at playful notes, and attentive stillness that indicated complete engagement. He could feel their energy in return, a subtle force that encouraged him to continue with more freedom, to let the music speak without fear. Each note became more confident, more expressive, and the simple piece he had been asked to perform became a story shared between him and everyone in the room. Halfway through, he made a small choice that surprised even himself. A note lingered slightly longer than expected. A soft trill added emotion. A pause allowed the melody to breathe in a way that was not written on the page. For an instant, he worried he had gone too far, that the audience would not understand. Then he looked up and saw faces absorbed, listening. Some moved in ways that were clear even from the stage. That moment of doubt passed, replaced by a deep satisfaction. He had trusted himself, and it was working. The final notes approached, and he felt a mixture of relief and exhilaration. The piece had taken on a life of its own, flowing effortlessly from the instrument, through his fingers, and into the hearts of the listeners. He allowed each note to end slowly, letting the final chords resonate in the hall. For a moment there was silence. The audience held their breath, caught in the beauty of the music. Then the applause began, soft at first, then growing into a powerful, unanimous response. He rose from the piano, feeling the warmth and energy of their appreciation wash over him. Backstage after the performance, he was met with smiles and congratulations from organizers and fellow performers. They told him how moving his interpretation had been, how the piece had come alive in a way they had not expected. He felt a quiet pride, not arrogance, but a sense of fulfillment that came from sharing something deeply personal and seeing it resonate with others. The nervousness that had filled him moments earlier was replaced with joy and relief. Walking out of the hall later, he reflected on the experience. What had begun as a simple request, a short and basic piece, had become an unforgettable performance. It had challenged him to trust his instincts, to let emotion guide technical skill, and to share himself with others. He realized that the courage to take risks and the dedication to practice in silence had brought him to this moment, and he felt grateful for every quiet hour of preparation, every doubt faced and overcome. He understood now that music was not just notes on a page or technical skill alone. It was a language, a way to connect, to tell stories, to evoke feeling without words. That understanding gave him a new perspective on his own gift. He knew that every performance in the future would be shaped by this experience, that he had discovered the power of his voice through a simple piece, and that he could transform the ordinary into the extraordinary when he trusted himself. As he walked home, the streets were calm, and the night air was crisp. He replayed the performance in his mind, noting what had worked and what he could refine, but mostly he felt the lingering warmth of connection. He had faced fear, embraced his talent, and shared it fully. The simple piece had become a turning point, a moment that would stay with him forever, not just for the applause, but for the knowledge that he could rise to the occasion, trust his instincts, and create something unforgettable with nothing more than his skill, heart, and courage. He had finished the first part of the performance, but the moment was not yet over. The audience was clearly captivated, and he could feel the energy in the room flowing through him, guiding his fingers as they moved over the keys. He had begun to play the simple piece, but now it had transformed into something entirely alive. The notes he had practiced in private with subtle improvisations now carried emotion and nuance, each phrase telling a story beyond words. As he continued, he allowed himself to explore the music even further. Small variations emerged naturally. The melody would linger longer than expected in some places, a soft trill or arpeggio would add texture, and subtle changes in timing made the piece feel like it was breathing. He could feel the audience responding, leaning forward, absorbing every note, and that connection gave him a thrill he had never experienced before. Music was no longer just a sequence of sounds. It was a dialogue between him and everyone in the hall. The longer he played, the more he realized that fear and self-doubt had melted away. He was no longer performing for approval or validation. He was performing to share a part of himself. Every movement of his hands, every press of a key, was a reflection of the weeks of practice, the sleepless nights, the small triumphs of learning and experimenting in solitude. The simple piece had become a canvas for his emotions, and he could see the faces in the audience reacting to the story he was telling. At one point, he paused slightly, letting a note hang in the air longer than usual, and he noticed a subtle gasp from the audience. That tiny reaction reminded him of how powerful music could be. He had taken a basic assignment and infused it with his own expression, and the room responded. Encouraged, he continued, letting his instincts guide the flow of the piece, feeling the music move him in ways that were both surprising and exhilarating. He began to imagine the people in the audience individually, not just as a crowd but as listeners with their own experiences and emotions. He thought of a young child perhaps seeing music performed for the first time, an older person recalling memories evoked by certain notes, someone quietly struggling with life who might find solace in the sound. These thoughts deepened his focus and brought sincerity to every phrase. He was not performing for applause but to touch hearts, even if just for a few moments. The complexity he added was subtle, not extravagant. He avoided overwhelming the piece with unnecessary flourishes. Instead, he emphasized the melody, gave weight to certain notes, and softened others to create a dynamic flow. The simplicity of the original composition provided a framework that allowed his creativity to shine. It was a delicate balance, but one he had learned through hours of careful practice, intuition, and trust in his own instincts. He noticed the atmosphere in the hall shifting. The audience was no longer simply listening. They were engaged, almost breathing with the music. Some closed their eyes, some smiled quietly, some leaned forward as if trying to catch every detail. The energy of their attention gave him confidence and encouraged him to keep exploring, to follow where the music wanted to go. He could feel a sense of unity, a shared experience between performer and listeners that was both humbling and exhilarating. Midway through, he faced a moment of challenge. A note he intended to play hesitated under his fingers, a brief slip that would have unnerved him in private practice. For an instant, panic flickered, but then he reminded himself that music was not about perfection. He adapted, turned the moment into part of the flow, and allowed the improvisation to continue naturally. The audience did not notice a flaw. They only felt the continuity, the emotion, and the sincerity of the performance. That moment reinforced a lesson he had learned during preparation. Mistakes could become part of the beauty if embraced rather than feared. Encouraged, he pushed further. He added subtle harmonies and gentle variations in tempo that reflected the mood of the piece at each moment. The music started to take on a story of its own, a narrative of emotion and expression that went beyond the written notes. He felt fully immersed, each note a choice, each chord a sentence. His nervousness from earlier days was replaced with a sense of purpose and freedom. He understood that he was not just playing music but living it, sharing a personal journey with everyone present. By the final passage, he allowed himself to be completely absorbed in the performance. The earlier tension was gone. Only focus and joy remained. He could feel the music as much as he could hear it, a vibration that connected him to the room, the audience, and the instrument. He played the last notes with a gentle flourish, letting them resonate, letting the story conclude naturally. There was a pause, a moment of quiet where the room seemed to hold its breath, and he sat still, listening to the final vibrations echoing through the hall. Then came the applause. It started softly, then grew, louder and more enthusiastic, filling the hall with energy and appreciation. He rose from the piano, feeling both relief and exhilaration. People were smiling, clapping, and some were even standing, a response that filled him with awe. The performance he had feared might be ordinary had become unforgettable, not because of technical brilliance alone, but because it had come from the heart. The audience had felt his expression, his risk, and his courage. After leaving the stage, he was approached by fellow musicians and attendees, many praising the performance. They commented on the emotion, the subtle touches, and how the simple piece had been transformed into something extraordinary. Their words were encouraging, yet he felt the real reward was within him. The knowledge that he had played authentically, trusted his instincts, and shared something deeply personal. He understood that the power of music was not only in skill but in sincerity and courage. He walked out of the venue later, carrying a sense of fulfillment that stayed with him long after the applause faded. The simple piece that had seemed mundane had become a turning point, a moment where fear had been replaced with confidence and creativity. He reflected on the journey, realizing that every hour of practice, every doubt overcome, every private experiment had contributed to the beauty of the performance. It was not just an event. It was a personal achievement and a lesson in trusting oneself. He understood something essential. A simple task, approached with care, dedication, and courage, could become something extraordinary. The performance had shown him that the connection between performer and audience went beyond notes. It was about emotion, presence, and authenticity. The simple piece would forever be tied to this moment, a memory of triumph, growth, and the joy of sharing music in its purest form. The experience left him eager for the future, ready to explore new possibilities and to continue expressing himself with confidence, creativity, and heart. The applause had settled, leaving a warm, lingering energy in the hall that stayed with him even as he walked off the stage. He felt a mixture of relief, satisfaction, and quiet amazement. What had started as a simple request to perform a basic piece had become something he could hardly have imagined. He had faced fear, embraced creativity, and shared a part of himself that went beyond notes and technique. The experience left him with a sense of growth and a deeper understanding of what music could do. Backstage, people approached him with kind words and compliments. Fellow musicians told him how the piece had come alive, how each note had seemed to carry meaning beyond the original composition. Event organizers shook his hand, impressed by the way he had captured the audience's attention. Though their words were encouraging, he realized that the most important feedback was internal. The knowledge that he had trusted his instincts, expressed his feelings honestly, and transformed a simple assignment into a personal and moving experience was far more significant than any applause. He walked through the empty hall later, recalling the expressions on the faces of the audience. Some had smiled quietly, some had closed their eyes, and others had leaned forward, completely absorbed. He remembered the way the room had felt alive with attention, the subtle energy that had flowed from them back to him. It was a shared experience that had formed spontaneously, a connection he had never anticipated. That moment, he understood, was more valuable than any recognition or praise. It was the proof that music, when played with honesty and emotion, could truly reach people. Walking home, the night air was calm, and the streets were quiet. He replayed the performance in his mind, remembering each phrase, each pause, and each improvisation that had unfolded naturally. He reflected on the preparation, the doubts, the experimentation in private, and the courage it had taken to step onto the stage. Every step, every hour of practice, every small choice he had made contributed to the experience. He felt a profound gratitude for the journey and for the lessons it had taught him. He realized that this performance was not just about music. It had taught him about courage, about trusting himself, and about embracing uncertainty. He had learned that fear could be transformed into energy and focus, that doubts could be silenced by preparation and instinct, and that authenticity was more powerful than perfection. The simple piece had become a mirror reflecting not only his talent but also his character, his resilience, and his willingness to step beyond comfort and routine. The next day, he returned to his piano at home. It felt different now, not just an instrument, but a tool of expression and a reminder of the performance. He played the same simple piece again, and it sounded familiar yet new. He added the subtle flourishes he had developed, and this time he felt a quiet confidence. The experience had changed the way he approached music. Every note was deliberate, every pause meaningful, and the joy of creating and sharing music was stronger than ever. He thought about the future. The performance had opened doors in ways he had not imagined. People had seen what he could do, and there would be opportunities to perform again, to challenge himself further, and to explore new possibilities. But more importantly, he had discovered a personal truth, that his music could touch people, that his interpretation and emotion mattered, and that he had the ability to turn simple beginnings into remarkable experiences. He shared the story with his family and friends, recounting the moment on stage, the reactions, and the applause. They listened with admiration and pride, understanding that this was more than just a performance. It was a milestone in his growth as a musician and as a person. He realized that while others could celebrate the external success, the internal journey, the courage, the experimentation, the expression was what truly mattered. In the following days, he reflected often on the performance. He thought about the people who had been moved, about the subtle ways music could evoke feelings and memories, and about the responsibility he carried as a performer to remain authentic and true to his voice. He understood that music was a dialogue, not just with the audience, but with himself, a way to explore and express the deepest parts of his being. The simple piece had become a symbol of possibility, a lesson in creativity, and a reminder that even small assignments could lead to extraordinary outcomes. He also thought about the moments of doubt and anxiety that had preceded the performance. He realized that fear was a natural companion to growth, that hesitation was part of the process, and that embracing uncertainty often led to the most memorable experiences. The courage he had discovered was not just about performing music. It was about facing challenges, trusting his instincts, and daring to express himself fully in any situation. As weeks passed, he continued to practice, but now with a renewed perspective. The simple piece remained in his repertoire, but it was no longer ordinary. It held memories, lessons, and the confidence that came from overcoming fear and trusting his own creativity. Every time he played, he remembered the audience, the energy of the hall, and the sense of connection that had made the performance unforgettable. It was a touchstone, a reminder of what was possible when talent, preparation, emotion, and courage aligned. He began to think about new challenges and opportunities, feeling inspired to explore different styles, to experiment further, and to push beyond comfort zones. The experience had instilled in him a belief that even modest beginnings could blossom into extraordinary moments if approached with dedication, honesty, and heart. The simple piece had been his canvas, and now he understood that every note he played in the future could carry the same potential for impact and meaning. Looking back, he realized that the performance had changed more than just his musical journey. It had shaped his perspective on life, teaching him the value of courage, patience, and authenticity. He had discovered that personal growth often came from small, deliberate steps, and that meaningful expression could leave a lasting impression far beyond the stage. The audience's reaction had been a reflection of his own sincerity and dedication, a reminder that genuine effort and emotion could resonate deeply with others. He felt a quiet pride in knowing that he had faced the challenge, embraced his instincts, and allowed the music to guide him. The experience remained with him as both a memory and a lesson, that simple beginnings could lead to extraordinary outcomes, that fear could be transformed into strength, and that authenticity was always more powerful than imitation. The simple piece had become a symbol of possibility, a story of courage, and a testament to the power of music to connect hearts and minds. Even months later, he would occasionally return to the memory of that night, the moment when a simple request became an unforgettable performance. He would think of the audience, the quiet joy of the music, the nervous excitement before stepping on stage, and the confidence that had grown as the notes flowed. It was a defining experience, one that shaped his approach to music and to life. He had learned that with preparation, courage, and heart, even a modest task could become a remarkable achievement. The simple piece would always remind him of that journey, of the lessons learned, and of the transformative power of music. It would remind him to trust himself, to embrace challenges, and to play with sincerity and emotion, no matter the audience or the circumstances. That night on the stage had shown him that the ordinary could become extraordinary, and he carried that understanding into every new endeavor, every new composition, and every new performance, forever changed by the courage and heart that had led him to deliver an unforgettable performance.